introduction.
Okay, right, I'll just share my screen. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Yep.
Lovely. Technical challenge number 1 overcome. Okie dokie. So my name's Charlotte. The newest project that is being developed, and it is the Sherbourne Valley project. And we've got our shiny new branding and new tagline, which says, we're bringing back the source of the city for people, for wildlife, and for the future. So it's quite an all-encompassing statement, and I will go through what we are planning to do throughout the course of this evening. It's not just me on this project. There are 3 of us newly in post, and the team will get bigger if we're successful in our funding bid. But for the time being, there's myself as the Cultural Heritage and Community Engagement Officer, which means I've got quite an interesting job looking at the history of the river as well as the natural world. Then there's Alex Jones, who is the Natural Heritage Officer. So as his title suggests, he's very much looking at the boots on the ground work that we'll be doing. And then finally, we've got Kaz Bailey, who is our boss, the scheme development manager, who keeps us all in check, and will be doing the final roundup and report for our big funding bid, which again, I'll go into. So this evening, I'm going to give an overview of the scheme to give you a sense as to what it is that we're planning. I'm using a phrase, living landscapes. I'll explain a little bit about what that is and why that's so important in this context. And then a bit about our aims and the activities that you can expect to see both this year and over the next 4 years. So I'm going to start just by giving a little bit of context. So this phrase, living landscape, it's a phrase that within the Wildlife Trust movement, we adopted it, but it is one of those phrases that's a slightly internal thing. And if you're not in that world, it doesn't necessarily mean anything to you. A living landscapes approach essentially is pulling together the main aims of the Wildlife Trust, which is to bring people close to nature, so putting that connection back, and also having a land that's rich in wildlife, something that we have lost over the decades. So in Warwickshire specifically, Warwickshire Wildlife Trust has approximately 65 reserves. Most of them are accessible to the public. 1 or 2 of them are not, but most of them are accessible to the public. And that gives a really good start point and grounding for some really great places that we can find wildlife at the moment. But actually, despite the fact that we've got 65 of these reserves, it's only 0.4% of the land of Warwickshire, Coventry and Solihull. So it's a tiny, tiny proportion of the land within our working area. And if you think about the wildlife that has to try and occupy the rest of it, they're having a much tougher time outside those reserves, which is something of a problem. And the problem has been looked at over the years, and quite recently in 2019, there was a big report that came out called The State of Nature. And it really assessed what was happening to our habitats and to our landscapes and to our species. And there are some very alarming statistics that were highlighted in that. So, for example, 80% of our heathlands have been lost since 1800. 80% is a huge number. And only 20% of our rivers are healthy. So the Sherbourne is in unfortunately good company, being in a fairly shocking state. In terms of water voles, 94% have been lost. That's nearly all the water voles have been lost across Britain, which is very worrying. Toads aren't doing very much better. Common toads have declined by 68% only in the last 30 years. So their drop has gone down quite dramatically. And the statistics continue. More than 1 in 10 species in the UK faces extinction, which is terrifying. And most endangered species have declined by 2/3 since 1970. And with all of those problems that have been highlighted, you'd think that, you know, people would put more money towards it and try and sort things out, but actually it's got worse. and public funding for nature has been slashed. And in the last 10 years, the funding has decreased by 35%, which is not helping these statistics as well. And then the last one is wildflower meadows. And since the 1930s, we've lost nearly all of them. 97% of wildflower meadows have gone. So we are just losing things hand over fist, left, right and centre in a very frightening and fast way. There was a second review that was done before that, about 10 years before that. There was one called the Lawton Review, which is another big piece of work that's been done that has really been filtering through the conservation world. And this Lawton Review from 2010, there's a quote here that I've put in, which says, there is compelling evidence that England's collection of wildlife sites are too small and too isolated, which is leading to declines in many characteristic species. And with climate change, the situation is likely to get worse. So too small and too isolated, which is what we're seeing. It goes on to say that this is bad news for wildlife and bad news for us, because damage to nature means that the natural world is less able to provide many of the services upon which we depend. So this is talking about what we list as ecosystem services. So things like the fact that you've got pollinators pollinating our food crops. It's about wetlands holding up water to prevent flooding and holding in carbon to help mitigate against climate change. It's about reed beds filtering water and keeping it clean. And so on and so on, and trees and vegetation holding land up from preventing erosion and topsoil loss, keep good soil quality for crop growing. There's all sorts of things that nature does for us all the time, and we just take it for granted. And if we damage that in the way that we are losing those things that, you know, really make a difference to how we live our own lives. So the Lawton Review made a very good statement, despite these worrying statistics and assessment of the situation. They came up with a very clean and simple phrase and direction, which says it needs to be bigger, better, and more joined up. And so since 2010, that's the way that conservation has been going, is joining things up. So this little illustration here just shows a sort of simplified version of what we mean by that. So we've got the large pale green blob as the overall area that we're looking at, and then within it the darker green separated blobs that are your core areas of decent wildlife. So that might be, for the sake of argument, a nice bit of good quality ancient woodland or something like that. And then you've got the sort of pale brown linking sections, which are these linear corridors which we need to connect to try and connect those core areas. So that can be things like hedgerows, it can be things like the stepping stone corridor. So you've got little mini dark green patches on there. So that could be, for example, a roundabout that's been planted with a wildflower mix instead of just plain amenity grass. So something quite simple can make a stepping stone for species to leapfrog between one core area where the wildlife is good and another one. And then the big brown blob at the top is clearly the area that is not in great condition, and that's an area where we can do some restoration of an existing habitat and make it better, or just create it brand new if it's, for example, it's a disused industrial site and it's just all concrete. You know, that could be put back for wildlife. So it is about creating those connections within the landscape. And, you know, I won't go through a whole lot more statistics, but this slide just shows the species within Warwickshire that are at risk of declining with only a 2-degree warming within the world. So you think some of these things, like 49% of millipedes, 37% of centipedes, to some extent, you know, is it a bit so what? Do we care about that? But actually we do care about that, because it's the food chain. So if you're losing those species at the bottom, if you're losing your millipedes, you're losing your centipedes and your spiders and you know, your some of the plant species, then you're not going to be getting that full food chain. If you lose it from the bottom up, then you will have wider species loss as well. This map looks like quite a sort of alarming map, but actually it's quite straightforward when you look at it. So this is Warwickshire, and it got a little bit of Birmingham in the corner and Coventry there, and then it's done like a heat map. So you've got the and it's showing how easy it is for species to move through a landscape when they're trying to move from climate change. So with the overall temperatures going up, species have evolved to be in a particular temperature range, so they can either move further north in order to maintain the space, the temperature space that they want, or they can move to a higher altitude. In Warwickshire, we're not exactly blessed with mountains, so their option is to move further north. So this map shows how easy the landscape is for species to actually move further north. So you can sort of, so where it's orange, it's quite easy for species to move through and they can manage it. And where it's blue, it shows that that's a barrier to species moving, and the darker the blue, the harder it is for species to move through. And very unsurprisingly, the big urban blobs, Coventry and Birmingham, are dark blue, difficult or impossible for species to move through. And then you've got the areas between Birmingham and Coventry. You've got a nice strip of the orange, which means that it's, you know, a bit more rural and a bit easier for species to move through. So these are the sorts of things that we're thinking about when we think about land scale conservation and this living landscape concept. So what does that mean very specifically on the River Sherbourne Valley? And we've called the project the River Sherbourne Valley rather than just the River Sherbourne, because we want the whole system to be looked after. So anything that is affecting the river, not just if you're actually getting your feet wet, it might be that there's a nice bit of woodland nearby that works, or there's a park that we can work with. We didn't want to limit ourselves too much because, like I say, wildlife needs to be able to move. So if we can do something to help that in this project, then we can, and also that applies to people as well. Another map, this is also Warwickshire. So this is showing, it looks a little more complicated than it really is. Every one of those coloured blobs is essentially another one of the Living Landscapes projects like the River Sherbourne. Some of them are finished and done. So for example, the Sow Valley was a living landscape project that has recently finished. The Tame Valley is still ongoing. Dunsmore was a project that we had, which is finished as a funded project, but there are lots on there. So you've got 11 living landscapes projects that are either currently happening or have happened relatively recently. But there are still lots of white areas on the map which show the opportunities for us to do some work at a landscape scale in the future. So that will be future funding bits. But the River Sherbourne is on there as the landscape, the living landscape project around the Coventry area. So where is the river? This is something that I mentioned in the sort of general chit chat at the beginning, that people who've lived in Coventry all their lives quite often are only just vaguely aware there's a river at all, let alone, you know, any detail about where it is or any history or anything about it. So just to start with the very basics, it's 9 miles long. So it's a reasonably long river, and it starts up in the north of the city, up at Corley Moor. There are various people who claim the source of the river on their land. I think everybody would quite like it. It's quite a controversial thing to say exactly where the source is. There are 2 that are broadly accepted as the source, but the reality is that it's a spring-fed river, so there will be multiple springs that are coming up in that area, and they're all feeding into the Sherbourne. So quite legitimately, both people who claim the source of the river on their land can have it. One of them is, but one of them, which we like to point people to, is just off Washbrook Lane, because there's a public footpath that runs past it. So if people want to walk the Sherbourne, it's easier for us as a project to point them to a public footpath than a poor old farmer's land who doesn't want people traipsing backwards and forwards. So that's where it starts, and then it wiggles its way down through the more rural stretches of Cowden Wedge and Oldsley, and then comes down through Lakeview Park, which is a lovely spot, down through Spon End. And then as you get to the ring road, this is where the river disappears from view. It's culverted under the city centre, apart from a very short stretch at Palmer Lane, where it's above ground for maybe 30 metres, so not a long way. And it's at the back, which there is work being done on it to improve that area, but for years it's just been a bit of it's where the bins are. It's an unofficial taxi rank, and it's not the sort of place you'd go and hang out unless you particularly wanted to be mugged. So not a hot spot for riverside enjoyment. And then it disappears again. It goes all the way under the shopping centres and things. And finally, you see it again the other side of the ring road, coming down past the student accommodation on Goulston Road, through Charterhouse Heritage Park, and eventually it goes through Baggington and joins up with the River Sow, just in the field behind the Old Mill Hotel, if you know where that is. So all this length of river, what are we going to do with it? What are the aims of this project? Well, one of the things we're really keen to do is to reverse the decline of nature. You know, I talked about those horrible statistics at the beginning from the State of Nature report, and you know the comments that were made in the Lawton review, and that all applies through Coventry and through the River Sherbourne. So we don't want to just halt the decline. That's not enough. We need to go further. So we are reversing the decline of nature. So we're going to be doing a lot of work to make biodiversity better. In this project, we're actually also going to do some work with the built heritage. So we're going to try and protect the built heritage that's connected to the history of the river, which is quite an unusual aspect for a wildlife trust project. We don't tend to do that. We usually just go purely for wildlife. But I think because this is an urban context and an urban living landscape, we've got the opportunity to talk to people in a different way and engage with people in a different way. And that brings me to my third point, is that we want to have some more innovative engagement. We've got a huge variety of people who have the river on their doorstep because they're living in Coventry, and it's within, most people in the city will be in walking distance of at least some stretch of it. So how do we get people to make the most of it and to enjoy it and for it to mean something to people and make it an asset for people? And I keep saying we're going to, and I mentioned, you know, in a sort of passing comment, if we get the funding. So what are the timelines for all this and what exactly is happening? Well, this project is one that's been in the pipeline for quite a long time now. So after the Sow Valley project was established and funded and, you know, was up and running and was ticking along quite nicely, the Wildlife Trust thought, you know, the other project, the other river that really needs attention is the Sherbourne. It's in dire need of some work. So as far back as 2013, conversations were had to look at what might be done with the Sherbourne. And a partnership was created in 2017 to kind of create some kind of vision, some sort of strategy as to what we wanted to do. And then a funding application went into the lottery, actually, initially, with the initial plans, but it was rejected on the first round. They said, no, you need to go away and work more with more partners. You need your partners to put in more funding. You need to have a clearer, more joined up view. You know, we like the idea, but go away, work it up some more, come back to us. And so that's sort of where we are now. So we went away and did all of that work and resubmitted our round one application. And they've said, yes, now we're happy. We like the idea of this. We are applying for about 1.6 million from them. And then there's match funding from Severn Trent and the Environment Agency and the City Council, which takes the scheme up to heading towards 2 million. So it's a decent sized project. And the lottery don't just hand out money like that. They want you to have all your ducks in a row. They don't want any nasty surprises. So they said, right, in this next, you've got now 18 months to really put everything together, detailed costings, detailed feasibility studies, make sure that all of your legal arrangements are in place, make sure you've really spoken to the community and know what they want. And so that's where we are now. So this is our development phase, and we will be submitting our big funding application on the 1st of March next year for a 4-year project. And if we're successful, then we should be given permission to start in around about July next year. And then we will have 4 years of fantastic activities, and you'll see lots of things going on up and down the length of the river. And after 2026, when that main bit of funding runs out, in the same way that with the South Valley, we didn't want that to just peter out. It is about legacy. It's about keeping that momentum going. So through this project, part of it is getting communities to really take ownership of their river, and things like volunteer groups, friends of groups, to go out and continue the monitoring and any litter picking or, brush clearance, invasive species removal, and all the other things to keep the river ticking along and doing well when the main bulk of the capital works funding has run out. I mentioned a few of the partners. It is a big project. So independently, there are lots of people who've got a reason to be involved in the river in one way or another. And it made sense for us all to be working in the same way and on the same page. And that's exactly what the lottery wanted to see, so that all of our money goes further and we don't tread on each other's toes and we don't duplicate or miss things. So the Wildlife Trust, we're sitting at the heart of this project, but we are pulling together and coordinating all of the other independent stakeholders who've got a reason to be involved with the river. So Severn Trent, obviously, an obvious one really. So they're all about water quality. The Environment Agency is the little man with the tree. So they are water quality, pollution and flooding. Coventry City Council are the major landowner of most of the sites. Citizen Housing, who are doing a lot of redevelopment work down at Spon End. So when they do the work on the housing, they're re-landscaping the area around that and are aiming to make the Sherbourne a bit of a jewel in the crown, is their phrase, which is a lovely thing. So we're working with them. This year, Coventry City of Culture, of course, is in, so we can engage with people through their Green Futures programme. Historic Coventry are another major landowner. They've got the land at Charterhouse. And then you've got the Diocese of Coventry, who also have links in with all sorts of communities through the church groups, and quite often have premises that we can use to, for example, have venues to host events and activities, and they have their eco church scheme. So lots of ways they're getting involved as well. And then the final stakeholder is people like yourselves. It is that wider community, and without the community, this project's, it's a dead in the water project. We need everybody to be coming with us on this journey. This is not something presented to people. This is something done with people. That's really, really important. And we're dividing this into kind of three themes, a bit of a divide and conquer approach to what's quite a big task. So we're looking at the natural heritage, we're looking at the cultural heritage and community engagement, and then we're looking at the built heritage as well. So it's quite clearly divided for us to give us some structure. And we had to sort of put together our outcomes for the lottery, and this is what we told them that we will be doing. So forgive it if it's slightly formally written, but it is about the people of Coventry feeling connected to the river again, because at the moment lots of people, like I say, don't even know it's there. We very much want the river and its associated habitat. I talked about being valley wide, not just right in the riverbank. So the habitat's improved for wildlife. We want to increase people's access to it right the way along the length of it. We're not going to be able to put in great big new paths all the way along, and in many areas that would be inappropriate anyway. So there will always be muddy tracks and things, but there are certainly things where we can find out what sorts of barriers people have got to enjoying the river and do something about those. And different people will have different barriers, and that's one of the things we're doing this year, is trying to talk to people and find out what those are, excuse me, so we can do something about it. We're also looking to do some restoration of the built heritage and really celebrate it. The restoration of the built heritage will be, it'll have to be done in partnership with other people. There isn't the money to do whole scale restoration of it, but what we can do is assess how it is and look for partnership funding so we can do something further with that. But certainly celebrating it and making it valiant for people, we're going to be doing. I talked about local communities being empowered to take ownership of the river, which is really important, so that all this work doesn't peter out. And then finally, communities are able to access information and learning about the river, which is a very dry way of saying actually make it interesting for people. And that doesn't matter whether it's formal learning through schools coming out and doing things, whether it's guided walks, whether it's just an information panel on site, so people can just, you know, as they're passing, walking the dog, they can go, oh, that's I didn't know that. So there's a whole range of things that we'll be doing in that way. So natural heritage, what specifically are we doing? We'll be doing lots of practical volunteering days. So things like clearing back paths so that people can get to the river and the woodlands, or pulling Himalayan balsam. We'll be doing surveys for species to see how they're doing. So whether that's river fly that are actually in the river and can tell you the health of the water, or whether it's things like butterflies or wildflowers, or, you know, other things that are on the bank. So yeah, very much practical, you know, boots on the ground stuff. We'll be looking at weir removal. I'll talk about that later, but we need the detailed designs for that and the costing. So that's important. And alongside that, we're also looking at feasibility studies for new wetlands, which I'll talk about more in a moment. And then really assessing in detail the current state and condition of the river, and to reaffirm that where we said we wanted to work on the areas that we prioritised when we first put the application in, which was, it'll be heading towards 2.5 years between that first application going in and this next one. So it's about really reassessing that that is still the right places to work, and it's going to be money spent in the right way. And these pictures just give you a bit of a sense as to, you know, why we're tackling some of these things, and what it means for the river in particular. So the top picture is a weir in the culverted section of the river, where it's running right under the city centre. And as you can see, it's concrete floor, brick sides, not a scrap of vegetation anywhere, and a steep step down, fast flowing bank of river with that's probably heading towards a foot drop on that weir, which makes it very difficult for fish if they're trying to pass up that. So that's a very unnatural place for the river. And putting it in a culvert is disconnecting the river from its floodplain. And rivers need to flood. That's part of the natural processes. They need to rise and sink and rise and sink. If you think about the Nile, you know, it needs to do that process of flooding, so that it's putting the landscape either side back into its cycle of nutrients and water. And, you know, the River Sherbourne is no different. It's just a bit smaller. It needs to have that floodplain. So putting everything in concrete pipes and concrete sides and deep surfaces is disconnecting it from that, and that's a problem. And then the picture below is the horrible massive grid that goes just from Spon End, where the river goes under the ring road. It catches all the rubbish. It's a complete eyesore anyway, and it's just this massive intrusion of metal gridwork and concrete sides, and it creates a massive barrier for species to pass through, as you can probably imagine. So we've fragmented the habitat, we've sliced it up. So one of the things that this project will be doing in terms of the natural heritage is, starting this year, is to actually get a really good detailed map of where things like barriers to fish passages are, and identifying potential areas where we can do some habitat works, and locating problem outfalls. We're also looking at pollution along the river. So my colleague Alex, the Natural Heritage Officer, has been using an exciting new bit of software that we've all got very pleased about. I don't know if you've come across it. It's called Google My Maps, and it's a free bit of software, and you can just drop your pins in with and have layers of information. So it's like using GIS, which is a bit of fancy mapping software that is quite complicated and not very intuitive, but is what the conservation world and no doubt geographers and all sorts of other people would use. But for the likes of certainly of me, I don't have any GIS training. but this bit of software does the same thing, but in a much simpler way, and it's much more intuitive. And so you can put different layers on for different things, and you can be out in the field with it on your phone. And if you see a problem outfall that wasn't on the map previously, you can do a little pin in it there, make your notes, take a photo. It's a really brilliant piece of software for like a sort of working document. And then we've been able to share that with our various partners, and it makes meetings and conversations about what we need to do a lot easier. Lakeview Park is one of the key sites that we'll be working at. It's already had some work done on it by our sister project. So if you've been up there in the last, well, actually probably in the last 18 months, 2 years, something like that, you'll see that some work has been done on the channel to create a little sort of, it's being sort of nicknamed the beach now. It's a nice, gentle, sloped access into a point along the river, and some pinned woody debris, as the phrase, has been popped in there, which is basically logs have been put into the river channel to start creating a change of flow, which will help to put re-meanders back into the river, which is what we want to see. And a new wetland has been created about 3 years ago, so that's looking quite established now. So that's started the process of making the river more natural in that area, and we'll be doing more of that. And we're also going to be removing at least one of the weirs there, and and another one we're looking at, and it might be something where we can't remove it completely, but we can do other things that will allow the water levels to be much to basically level up the water either side of the weir. Because your weir comes along as a step down, and if you're a little fish and you need to swim up river in order to be able to lay your eggs and to breed, you might manage to do 1 or 2 weirs, but we've got there's about 50 weirs along the Sherbourne. So if you're a little tiny fish, by the time you've done 3, 4, 5, you're pretty much exhausted. So it's going to have an impact on your breeding, and it's also cutting populations off. So removing weirs is one of the things that we'll do to make that easier for fish to get up and down. And if we can't remove the weir completely, you can do things so that you can raise the water level on the lower side. So it's sort of like a log, I suppose, but less mechanical. So you're altering the water level so it's easier for fish to swim up, even when the water levels are lower. It means the step isn't so big. There's a very exciting project we're doing at Cowden Wedge. So at Cowden Wedge, it's one of the more natural parts of the river. It still meanders in a reasonable way, but there's this particular stretch along North Brook which feeds into the River Sherbourne, and it currently runs along a field boundary. So there's in probably the 1880s, somewhere there, the river was moved from the middle of the field to run in a sort of weird dogleg along the hedge line. So it's not doing what it should do at all. And there's a sort of weird soggy dribble at the bottom of the field, which is, neither ditch nor river nor anything else. And neither one are really doing very much for wildlife. But we will be doing, it's all looking quite feasible. We've had the contractors out on site to check whether we can, something called Stage 0 restoration. And if you look at the map at the bottom, it's basically a cross section of the field, and you can see there's it goes down in a broad V shape, and at the bottom of that V shape is where the river should be. But then halfway up one side, there's a little sort of kink notch taken out of it. Well, that little kink notch is where the river has been moved to just get it out of the way of the field, which is not where the river needs to be. The river wants to be in its paleo channel at the bottom, and that's what we'll be looking to put back, which will put back natural habitats and create new wetlands down in that area. And it's really exciting to be able to do something that has such a big impact. Charterhouse Heritage Park is also a really interesting site, and one that we will be working with. So Charterhouse is that gorgeous 14th century monastery down just opposite London Road Cemetery, and the river runs through its grounds. And much like the rest of the river, it's been modified and straightened, it's not as bad as some of the other stretches, but it could be a lot better, and there's a lot of rubbish in it. It's quite silted up, and so some of the natural processes are missing from there as well. So what we'll be doing at Charterhouse Heritage Park is looking to clean up the river that we've got. And then also, very excitingly, you can tell I'm very excited about lots of this project, we're going to be creating a brand new wetland at the Heritage Park as well. So the section, for those of you that are familiar with the site, so Bluecoat School backs onto the river, and they have it's somewhere between a playground and a basketball court, and I think occasionally they park coaches down there, I'm not sure, but they've got this big tarmac area at the moment, which is being signed over to Historic Coventry Trust, who own Charterhouse, and it will be creating a new wetland there. And wetlands are a bit like a magic bullet for everything. They're absolutely brilliant. So they help with flood alleviation because they hold water, so it slows it from charging down the channel and making a problem further down the line. They're going to hold it. They are a great carbon store. So again, more wetlands is helping to reduce the impact of climate change. They're brilliant for biodiversity. Lots of invertebrate species, bird species, mammals, plants. They're brilliant. They're a great provider of habitat, and of course, being such lovely areas, they're also really nice for people. So we'll have boardwalks and places that people can go through, and we'll be trying to make it as accessible as possible, so that actually it's a really good quality bit of nature that people who are living in that section of the city can walk to. But of course, it's going to be something that will be open for people who are coming from further afield as well. So really exciting work going on there. I talked about this slide of just more weirs. There's millions of weirs, and they're a nightmare. Some of them are little, some of them are big. They are from an engineering perspective, they're quite a challenge to get rid of them, particularly if they're under a bridge or something like that, because if you're digging them out or getting rid of them, you've got footings of bridges and all sorts of things on either side. So we will be looking to see what we can do in as many places as possible, but we're certainly going to be taking out key weirs where we can, and mitigating for problems for fish passage where we can't take them out. And then this final little illustration just shows that this is part of our Living Landscape project, is part of a nature recovery network. So this is something that's happening right the way across the city, and it's a whole mixture of different people need to be involved with this. It's not just about the nature reserves, it is this living landscape, it's that connectivity and leapfrogging and stepping stones for wildlife. So it might be garden ponds or just gardens, it might be allotments, it might be local wildlife sites, village greens, hedgerows, road verges, window boxes even. It's anywhere that we can make space for nature so that it has at least a fighting chance of getting from one space to another, so that you don't get bottlenecks of genetics or localized extinction, and then localized extinction turns to broader extinction. So the built heritage, this is really stories that we're going to be looking at largely on this one. We will be undertaking some condition surveys for the sites that have been identified, which I'll go through in a second. So we'll be seeing what kind of state they're in and what work needs to be done, because many of them just haven't really been looked at for years. And so this is an opportunity to at least get a starter and a foot in the door, which I think is what this project will be from a built heritage point of view. And we'll go from there. We're a bit more flexible on this one. So we've identified 6 heritage sites in the city that have a connection with the river, and so these are the ones that we're going to tell the story about in the first instance, but there will be other stories coming through which we will talk about as well. So Spon End is a bit of a hotspot. There are some great sites in Spon End, which poor Coventry. I didn't know Coventry before I started this project, and very unfairly I thought that all its history had pretty much been obliterated by the bombing and there wasn't really anything left. So I was delighted to discover that there's really fascinating history and things that you can still see here. And Spon End has a long and very interesting history, and particularly in the medieval period, but coming through more recently too. So we will be looking at Vignol's Bridge, so that lovely canal bridge that was moved to its current site in, I believe, 1955. So it came from the Oxford Canal and then was moved here when the motorway was being built. And luckily, somebody realised at that point that that bridge was too nice and too special to just go for scrap metal. And I think it was a personal connection from what I understand, that meant that somebody in Coventry said, you know what, we can have it in Coventry, let's look after it here. So it's this lovely iron bridge, and it's a listed bridge now. So that's one of the things we'll be telling the story of. The other bridge that's in Spon End is Spongate Bridge, which has been on that site since, you know, the medieval period and the old city wall gates, hence its name, Spongate Bridge. That was the access point. The current bridge is not medieval. It dates from around about 1765, but it's built with the stone that came from Spongate. So when Spongate was demolished and taken down, they reused that to make a bigger, slightly fancier bridge. So the bridge that we see now is 1765, but the stonework is older than that. And then right bang smack next to that bridge, you've got the Chapel of St. James and St. Christopher, which is the ruins of a little chapel that, again, 14th century, and it's sat next to the bridge as the entrance point, because we all know that St. Christopher is the patron saint of travellers, and St. James is the patron saint of pilgrims. So, and there were lots of pilgrims who came to Coventry to come to St. Mary's Priory, and they were all coming in through the gates, obviously, and across that bridge. And so they'd stop at the chapel and say prayers and receive blessings, and potentially, you know, more practical food and drink and perhaps shelter. So that little structure is quite interesting from all sorts of points of view. And the other sites that we've identified are more scattered around the city. You've got the World War II sluice gate, so jumping forward to some 20th century history in Charterhouse. That is something that was, there were originally 5 of them, and they were put in around about 1942 to replace earlier wooden sluice gates. There are now only 2 of these structures surviving, one on Humber Avenue and this one here at Charterhouse. The one on Humber Avenue is a little bit more complete. The one at Charterhouse is missing a couple of cogs, and there should be a railing, because you used to be able to walk along the top of it. I guess if you had a good head for heights, I'm not sure I'd got there. But despite the fact it's not as complete, that's the one that we will be highlighting in this project, because the Humber Avenue one is on private land. It's behind what am I trying to say, an electric barrier for a car park, and you just can't get to it to see it. So whilst it's slightly more complete, it's not very accessible. So we've got the Charterhouse one that we'll be highlighting and encouraging people to see, and it's right next to where we're going to have the new wetlands as well, which is good. And then St. Catherine's Well, which sticks out slightly on its own. It's just off the Holyhead Road. There's a little crescent of housing, and I'm just having a blank at this moment what that crescent of housing is called, but it's just off the Holyhead Road, and it really is hidden right in amongst the houses. You wouldn't even know it was there. But again, it's a 14th century well with its little roof. I'm still doing some research on it. I don't know a great deal about it at this point. I'm told that until relatively recently it wasn't fenced off and you could go and see it, but now it's behind a fence. I'm assuming they must have had problems with vandalism or antisocial behaviour. So it's open occasionally for Heritage Open Days, but it's not something that's particularly explained, and you simply wouldn't know it was there unless you were told and made a specific journey to see it. And then finally, it's another bridge, and sort of needless to say, with the river, and this is in Whitley. So this is the Whitley Abbey Bridge, which again is an 18th century bridge, and quite a nice one that went along past the mill. But none of these sites have got any interpretation of any description on them, with the exception of Whitley Abbey Bridge, which has a plaque on it that gives its name and when it was built, and precious little else. So one of the things we want to do is we want to dig out the history and share some of those stories. It's all about making making it more interesting for people, and more engaging. So I've had a brilliant time poking about, looking at old maps, looking at old photographs, illustrations. People send me things. It's just the most exciting process. So I've got this lovely photograph of Whitley Mill. I don't exactly know what date it is, but looking at the clothing that the children are wearing who are standing by the bridge, I would say probably, I don't know, turn of the century, maybe a little bit earlier. And you can still see the mill building next to the bridge, and it's much more open. You know, there's not so much vegetation around the bridge as there is now, and you can see the gentle gradient down to the bridge, and the mill's still there. So it's a really nice picture of what was once there. Then we've got personal stories, which I'm loving, these personal stories. And this was one that I came across and was very excited to get this photograph sent through. So this is a plane crash that happened in Whitley in 1934. And I came across this story just because I was having a poke about in some old newspaper articles. And I came across a little short clipping, no pictures with it, that just said that a Gypsy Moth plane had crashed into the River Sherbourne just in the Whitley area in 1934. And the story goes that it was a flying lesson, and a lady called Miss West was having a flying lesson. And she was slightly frustrating. I don't exactly know first of what. It says she was the first female pilot, but first of what, I don't know. But anyway, so she was a significant female pilot. And then while they were through their lesson, the engine cut out. And so the instructor said, don't worry, we can land in the field over there, that's fine. But unfortunately, as they were gliding down, the landing wheels for the plane caught in a fence and tipped the plane nose first into the river. Luckily, nobody was hurt. They were just, you know, a bit shaken up, a bit bruised, but nobody was injured. So I came across this story and thought, that's a fascinating story. And I thought, there must be pictures online, there must be something. And I poked about for ages and I couldn't find any pictures. And I thought, well, never mind. I'll just put it on our social media pages and just share the story, because I thought it was really interesting. And to my great delight, somebody got in touch through Facebook and said, my father was there when it crashed, and he went along and he took a photograph of it. And he sent me this photograph, which is not long after it happened. And it shows the plane forced square in the river, and a lot of gentlemen standing around in their very smart suits, slightly scratching their heads and, you know, slightly kicking the plane's wing and thinking, well, now what do we do with it, I assume. And so that was, you know, at sort of not quite at the moment of crash, but not far after. So there's all sorts of really individual stories, I think, that bring the river to life. It's not just about the buildings. It's not just about the wildlife. It's about the people who were connected to the river across the years. There's also another little story which I quite liked as well. So this is a little sketch from around about 1750, just a little black and white sketch of Gosford Gate and St George's Chapel. So they sat on the banks of the River Sherbourne on Gosford Street, and the little chapel. It was said, and I'm trying to work out if the thing hanging off the wall in the picture is this or not, so you'll have to see what you think. It was said that until about 1820, when it was converted into tenements, there hung on the wall of the chapel the shoulder blade for the Great Dun Cow. Now, I had to go and look this up because I thought, what is that? What is the Great Dun Cow? And as local people, you may well know this story. But for those of you who don't, this is what I discovered. So there was a character called Guy of, I've got a mental blank. That's frustrating. Guy of somewhere. It might even be Guy of Warwick, actually. But anyway, he was a local chap, and he was a little bit like Robin Hood. He may have been real, he may not have been real. He pops up from around about the time of Edward the Confessor, so, you know, 11th century. And then he has various sort of slightly legendary stories about him. And he is of a lowly birth, and he falls in love with a noble lady, and her father says, you can't marry him, you're not exciting enough, and you've got to go away and prove yourself, and so off he goes, and he does a series of quests. And one of the quests that he does is to do with this great dun cow. And the great dun cow apparently was a mythical cow, a giant, and she was huge, the size of a double-decker bus. And she was a very benevolent cow to start with, and would give milk to whoever wanted it. And it was all going swimmingly until a witch milked her through a sieve, is the phrase. Slightly bizarre, but anyway. And this offended the great dun cow so much. I don't know if it was to do with the fact she was thinking, well, my milk's not curdled, why does it need to be sieved? I don't know if that was the thought process. But anyway, the cow was very offended by this and went on the rampage, and being so large, caused complete havoc and mayhem and became a complete menace up and down the landscape. So Guy comes along and he slays the great dun cow to end the rampage. And then he divides the meat between Warwick and Coventry for people to feast on. And the story goes that the shoulder blade that hung in the chapel was from the great dun cow. So of course it wasn't really, but in Warwick Castle there was supposed to be a rib of the great dun cow from the same sort of period, and it turned out it was a whale rib. So there is some suggestion, although no proof one way or t'other, because I think the shoulder blade is long gone, that actually it was some other large mammal, and it's just been attributed to the great dun cow. But it makes a brilliant story, and I like getting a bit of that into the history of the river. So that is all about kind of what we in the trade call interpretation. So it's not just about telling you the dry facts as to what this is, but actually making it more interesting. And that's something we will be doing lots of up and down the river. We've been asking people what they think about the interpretation. So which bits of the river are most important to you individually, and in what way would you like to find out about them? Do you prefer to find things out on a website? Do you prefer it to be a panel on site? Do you like guided walks? What sorts of ways do you enjoy finding out about the information? And there's still time to actually have your input onto the interpretation and actually any other aspects of this project. There is a survey out online at the moment. I've put the link there. It's warwickshirewildlifetrust.org.uk/River Sherbourne surveys. So it takes about 6 minutes to do, and it would be really, really helpful if you had 6 minutes over a cuppa to fill that in and add your thoughts to the project, because that all goes into shaping it to make it something that's really valuable and hits the mark for people and wildlife. So that's the cultural heritage side of things. Community consultation is right at the forefront of what we're doing this year, and various engagement activities. I'm going to scoot through this slide because it's not as exciting, and go to the next one. So what we're doing this year, and you'll see little bits and pieces, but it'll mostly happen, most of the activities will happen next year when we've got the funding. We're doing taster sessions this year to kind of see what people think, what people like. So it might be family events, guided walks, living history type things, and learning about wildlife and conservation techniques, and an opportunity to try it and have a go. So any of those things, if opportunities come up, they will be on our Facebook page. So you can always find out what we're doing there. And we're just trying any activities. And if you've got any activity ideas yourself, any subjects that you want talking about, either on the natural side of things or the heritage or cultural side of things, drop me a line, put it on the survey, give me a shout in one way or another, and then we can really make the activity programme for the 4-year project really exciting and inclusive. And inclusive is really important. So this project, I mentioned at the beginning, being an urban living landscape, we can really talk to more people about wildlife, people who don't necessarily get involved with wildlife much at the moment. We can make it something that is accessible and interesting and engaging to people. And I can't remember the actual statistic, but there is a thing that literally just walking and standing under a tree lowers your blood pressure. It's literally that simple. And there's I can't remember by what percentage. There's another thing, a statistic or some research that was done, that if you're in hospital, if you can see a tree out of your window, your recovery is X% faster. And that can even actually oddly just be a picture of a tree, but seeing the real thing is even better. So giving everybody the opportunity to get out and be with nature can only be a good thing. And if we all enjoy it, we're more likely to take care of it, and that is just a positive spiral upwards. And there are ways you can get involved. We are running volunteer work parties. My colleague Alex is in charge of that at the moment. So if you fancy getting some wellies on, getting in the river, or doing some monitoring of some wildlife, or looking at the water quality, or stuff in the woodlands, there's all kinds of different things that he's doing. You can either drop Alex an email directly. He's alex.jones@wkwt.org.uk, or our general, there we go, I thought I'd done it, or our general email, which is easier to remember, I think, possibly, is Sherbourne@wkwt, that should be .org.uk, and that'll get through to us. So that is a very whistle-stop tour of a huge amount of stuff that we've been doing. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed it. I know I talked 19 to the dozen, but there's a lot to do. It's very exciting and it's very important. And I hope to see you at some of our events maybe. And another final plug for the survey, if you had a chance to do that. And the Sherbourne Valley Project is what you'd search on Facebook to keep up to speed with what we're doing. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. Can I ask a question before I disappear?
Yes.
You can't see me because I'm on the telephone. I live on the Horsley Park Estates, and there is a brook which goes west to east from Eastern Green area. I don't know where it starts, towards the Horsley Old Road, towards the Sherbourne, I suppose. Would that feed into it?
I would think it probably would. Without looking on a map, I wouldn't like to say 100%, but there are lots of little brooks that all do feed into it. So yeah, I would think very strongly that that does feed into the Sherbourne. So we're just looking at the moment as to what we can do with those brooks. In the original funding application, we didn't specifically mention a project boundary and where the brooks were going and what we could do on them. So we were thinking about work actually on the river, but as we've gone through this development phase, it makes complete sense to include the brooks that are feeding into it. So we're certainly doing North Brook and this stage 0 restoration, and they're doing some work over at Knowles Mill Park and the Radford Brook. They've done a lot of work there, and so this brook, I don't know what name it's got. I'd have to have a look on the map. But yeah, it would make sense to include that in the project and do something to improve it if we're able to.
Well, thank you very much. I'm disappearing now.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming.
No problem. Thank you.
Bye, Graham.
Bye, Graham. Bye.
Oh, Charlotte, thank you very much for your talk. Nice to see our river is going to be restored. Might be able to help you with one of the heritage projects. I'm also the archivist for the Coventry Canal Society.
Are you?
And that bridge was definitely, I think, was removed either in the late 60s or early 70s.
Okay.
I can remember it in situ in the 50s. I used to cycle up Woodway Lane. But I can give you its history. I've actually written an article in this month's Earlston Echo, if you can get a copy of it.
That's exactly what I need. Yes, please.
And I've also got some pictures of it in situ. I'm not exactly sure when it was put there, but the Oxford Canal was straightened out in the 1830s to remove a lot of meandering loops. And I think it was put in place when the loop around South Common was, well, not cut off, but it was bypassed by an embankment. And I know it was in situ in the mid 50s because I can recall it. So I saw some pictures about 10 years, a picture of it 10 years ago. And I said, yes, that's that bridge at Woodwade. I didn't even look, and it came back at a flash. But I've recovered pictures off Facebook, and the Coventry Canal Society has access to an excellent picture of it in situ. But I could write, you could use what's in that article. I don't know the exact date it was moved to Spon End. That's the only thing I haven't got knowledge of, but I can certainly fill in a lot of background on it, because there's lots of Horsley bridges on the Oxford Canal. If you go up to Hawkesbury, the bridge that's over the two canals, that's a Horsley bridge. There are Horsley bridges further down the Oxford Canal. There's one at Brinklow, and there are one or two others. So I think they were all put in place when that straightening exercise was put in place in, I think, the mid-1830s.
That sounds really interesting. Yeah, if you can ping me over whatever information you've got, I will lap it up. That sounds absolutely brilliant. Thank you. I'm always pleased to get good information about any of the aspects.
And the second thing was that I can recall on Priory Road a weir that's roughly where Priory Hall is for Coventry University, because it runs somewhere along there, doesn't it? The Sherbourne.
It does,
yeah. I have a recollection of this weir and a building like a factory called Spencer's alongside it, which I think made stuff for horse tackle. I mean, this is going back to, we're talking now of, when was that? Somewhere between 1955 and 1962. But I certainly recall that weir there, and it was quite big and involved. And there was very little water in the Sherbourne. So I don't know what happened to that. It must have obviously been dismantled
yeah.
It was called.
So much was changed at that end. Well, all the way along, but yeah, that end did have a lot of work done. That's really interesting. Yeah, really interesting. Okay, I have to do some research on that bit. Brilliant.
Bob, is that the current echo or the next one?
It's the current one.
Oh, I'll have to have a look. I think we've got it.
Yeah. If someone's got an e-copy and they can email it over to me.
Well, I can send you a copy of the article. That's not a problem.
Yes, please. Yeah, that would be fantastic.
In digital form, and my photographs are in colour.
Brilliant.
Charlotte, the Coventry Country Scouts, because my boyfriend's a scout leader, David. Could they be involved with it?
Yes, so actually I was out with First Alsley Scouts last night. So I've tested the session with them last night, and I think it went reasonably well. They seemed happy and to enjoy it. So this year it's just me scrabbling around until the end of where are we? 6 weeks back from then, so probably until the end of September I've got my window to actually test sessions, and then from the beginning of October we'll be assessing it and writing it all up into a report, because the lottery want to see basically a pretty good first draft by the 8th of November. So I won't have very much more capacity to do any more testing this year, but if we're successful in the funding bid, then from next summer onwards, absolutely, they can definitely get involved. Yeah, there are various badges. The activities I did last night was looking in particular at the naturalist badge. But yeah, seeing that link in the chat as well, that yeah, definitely there are lots of things they can do, whether they want to come out and just help or work towards a badge or just come out and have a bit of fun. Yeah, we've got we call it our River Rangers session, which we've adapted for
I've posted a link in the chat to the scouts.org.uk activity badges to the environmental conservation badge, which I hold one when my scout group First Porkington stayed down at Gilwell. We spent a day doing some rhododendron and holly bashing in Epping Forest.
Excellent.
And everybody that took part got the badge.
Brilliant. Excellent.
So I think as a Coventry as a scout county could be very involved with that.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I think it's a really great opportunity for young people to get involved with a project right in their doorstep. So yeah, 100%
Absolutely.
behind that. I think that sounds brilliant. Yeah. Any other questions for me? I'll do my best to answer. Or just comments, thoughts?
I think it's high time, isn't it, really, that our river was restored. I didn't realise that it was in such a bad state. I mean, I didn't realise there were all those weirs on it. So it must have been once upon a time had a hefty flow on it if it was part of the wool and dye trade.
I was about to remark that it doesn't look much like a river anymore. It's like a little stream.
It's a funny old river, really, isn't it? It's never really been. I mean, it's not the Mississippi, you know, put it that way. But it is notorious for having low and high flow, and you know, I'm sure you've all seen it flood and then look like a tiny trickle. It does vary. Certain stretches, it varies a lot in its water levels.
I don't think I've ever seen a fish in it.
It's got tiny fish. It's got sticklebacks and bullheads in it, but they're, you know, maybe that big. They're quite small. But it, you know, there are stretches where it does all right. But even though it's only 9 miles long, at one point there were 14 watermills along it. So at the peak of watermilling,
Gosh.
it was a huge number. And of course, because it's not a deep river, watermills, you probably remember from your school days perhaps of doing watermills, there are 2 different types of water wheel. You've got the undershot and the overshot. So the undershot wheel is where you need a reasonably deep, fast flowing river for that, because the water wheel literally just sits in the channel, and then it's the force of the water going underneath it pushes the wheel around. So it's got to have enough force going through it for that. The Sherbourne never really had that much power in it. So at that point, you need gravity to help you out to push the wheel. So you have the overshot wheel, and that's where you do a lot more to the channel, and that's where you start damming things up, creating mill ponds, and then your mill race, and you set your wheel underneath a dammed mill pond. So like a sort of infinity pool, the water then comes up and over the top of the wheel, and then you've got gravity pushing the wheel round, but you can put different planks in to raise the level of the pond or drop it, depending if it's a dry or wet period, and then you can control the speed of the wheel going round. So for the most part in the Sherbourne, it was mill ponds and mill races, which meant that the river's been straightened, channeled, dammed, ponded all over the place, up and down its length. And although there were 14 at one time, we know there's records of watermills on there from the Domesday Book as our earliest record. So that's 1066. There were existing watermills, and those will have been replaced, upgraded, swapped over. And every time they did that, they will have messed about with the river to adjust it as they wanted to. So the river is really not in its original course by any stretch. So it's unsurprising really that it's in a fairly sorry state for nature. We've poked about with it for centuries.
We talk about things that we'd like to see around the river. Now, obviously, you've spoken about all the tributaries that come into it, and I'm aware that there's quite a few which are now culverted. It'd be nice to have a map or something showing most of them around the city.
Good idea.
Obviously, we walk over them regularly without knowing that there's even a brook or a river there. So
yeah,
that would be a
good idea. Yeah, we can certainly look at doing something like that.
Must be a few near us in Spon End and
that
area.
Yeah.
I quite like the London Underground map style, maybe something of that ilk.
Okay.
Or possibly a 1 to 10,000 for from the OS of the city centre, where it's all sort of where it used to run, where it is now, and where it's culverted, and where the confluences are, etc.
That's a really good idea. Yeah,
really
absolutely. I will make a note of that. Yeah, good thoughts. Yeah, we're looking at the moment at what we do in the city centre to highlight to people the fact that there's a river under their feet. We can't raise it to the surface. It's underneath 2 shopping centres and Subway and all sorts of other people. So we can't lift it to the surface. And Oh, I didn't really talk about the Palmer Lane section, which I should have done really. At Palmer Lane, this horrible bit of taxi rank area and bins, it is the one bit where the river is above ground, and Historic Coventry Trust, in partnership with the City Council, have got a massive project which the planning application has gone in only last week, to redevelop that whole site, to make it more of a community space, open the river up more, so they'll be lifting the lid, as it were, on an additional about 5 meters of it, making nice stepped access, green planting, all in that area. The idea, if everything goes to plan, is that they'll start the work over the autumn winter, with the aim to be complete and it ready to be open for people to enjoy in the summer next year, probably July time, assuming no major delays. And then that funny little building, if you know the side of it, there's a sort of, it's like a hexagon cut in half, the Illingworth building. That's looking like it's going to be converted into a cafe. So you'll have kind of that cafe culture a bit, and there'll be people then overlooking the site, and the cafe will be open probably till about 10 o'clock-ish, so some early evening type stuff, which means that there'll be more sensible users in that site. I think the phrase is passive surveillance, but basically it means that there are people just having a nice time, having a chat and a cup of coffee and enjoying themselves, rather than, you know, the antisocial behaviour, because it's a bit of a hidden spot where you can get up to all sorts of things that you shouldn't be. So the idea is to improve it, and it's going to make a really big difference.
Incidentally, I've seen photographs by so-called urban explorers who've gone through the culverts, and the remains of old bridges under there. Not just concrete culverts. There are places where the buildings that were there are still there, and they've been included in the culverts. Yeah, it's really, it's really exciting under there. I'd love to get underneath there. Yeah, me too. It would be so good. We keep asking as a project if we're allowed to go under the culvert, but to do it officially, because it belongs to the council, you have to do things in the official way, and it's about a £4,000 a person training course, because they have to lift the drain hole, what am I trying to say? Like the manhole covers and the drainage covers, they have to lift them before you go in to let all the dangerous gases escape. And then they have to do all kinds of other different things, and a billion different risk assessments, and a billion different training things that you have to do in order to get through it. So currently we're not being allowed to go through. But then there are the people who just did it, and they've got that lovely video. Are they called 28 Days Later or something like that? And actually they just went and did it. And there's this great footage, isn't there, of underneath and the lovely old bridges and their footings, and itching to get in there. Shucks that we have to do it all officially. We'd be in too much trouble. Thank heavens for health and safety, guys. Don't say very often.
Maybe commission a team of spelunkers to go down there with cameras and video their journey.
I was sort of hoping
they would have the necessary training and skills. Just have to go through the standard health and safety brief, etc.
I think we're going to have to get more creative. I wondered if we could get a drone down there, and I asked a drone operator, pilot, whatever you call them, and they said it would be fine until you lose the signal, and then you wouldn't be able to control it. So I thought, oh, that's a shame, because I thought that might be a way around it. But yeah, you're right, we are going to have to look at things, and that's not a bad option, actually. I'll make a note of that.
I suppose you might be able to poke down some cameras, couldn't you? Some boroscopes or something like.
Yeah, down a manhole cover.
Various strategic places.
There's a stream. I've just realised there's a stream that I used to play in with my friends when I was a kid in Tile Hill that that leads towards Canley, and I guess that probably contributes to the Sherbourne somewhere.
Yeah, it will do.
Runs behind all the industrial buildings on Torrington Avenue.
Okay. I need a map. I'm not very good if I don't have a map in front of me. But pretty much all the brooks and things run into the Sherbourne in one way or another in the city centre, because it's really the only option, unless they're going into the canal. They're pretty much all going into the river. There isn't much another option. So ultimately, I think that probably will do.
And that brook you're talking about, it goes through Canley Ford, and it actually comes from Kenilworth Castle.
Oh, it's
does it really? What, the one that runs through?
Yeah, it's got a very odd.
From
seems to flow in the wrong direction.
Oh, is it?
Is it?
Is that the one?
The one that runs down parallel to Duggins Lane.
Yeah, my memory is the one that follows the railway line along Torrington Avenue, the main Coventry Birmingham railway line. It's in a field next to that. Well, it's now culverted mainly under industrial structures, but we used to play in it as kids. And
map.
I'm pretty sure it flows towards Coventry.
It does. I say it flows from Kenilworth towards Coventry and then joins the Sherbourne, and then that all drains into the Sow and the Avon. So it goes round in a loop.
I thought it contributed to the Sherbourne. Where are we?
Yeah, are you right to zoom out a little bit? Let me just get my bearings.
Right.
Having to learn Coventry.
Dave, put your cursor on the other side of the river, other side of the railway, and you'll see. I'll have to get close to see it. Hang on. Huntsville Wood. This works. Oh, you can see where it says Tile Hill Station. You can see the stream there, just above the words Tile Hill Station. There's a stream. Yeah, there it is. That's the one.
Do you know, I don't know if that does go into the Sherbourne. It might be a bit far over.
It's culverted underneath the Peugeot and what used to be a Marconi storage facility close to Raymond James Caravans, which is there.
Yeah,
that's the pop out there.
That's the bottom of the road where I grew up.
Then it's culverted under the buildings and pops out underneath the railway, and then runs parallel to the railway.
Yeah.
Oh, it runs. Oh, I see that. It runs back into.
Along there. Yeah. Okay.
Wow.
You know, I don't know. I wouldn't like to say for sure that is outside my sphere of knowledge.
That's the one that goes through Canley Ford, which is here.
Yeah.
Oh, is that the same stream? Ah.
Yeah. Then it veers south then and runs down towards the pumping station. So and joins in with the one from Cryfield Grange, which is the one from the castle, and that. So
oh yeah, I've never followed it that far before. That's quite interesting.
And then it runs further down.
I think it's going in the wrong direction for the Sherbourne.
Yeah, but it does flow. It's culverted again, and it meets here. Runs down through Beechwood Gardens and the allotments, and then runs down and then becomes culverted underneath the former.
Going that way.
Where the fairground is there.
Is it the same one that runs past Hersal Common?
Yeah, there's Hersal Common. There's another one comes in from the north side and round the back of the allotments.
Where it says Coventry in big letters is also Hersal Common.
Yeah, that's the fairground.
Yeah.
Then it disappears underground and it becomes culverted. And then here's the Sherbourne here.
Yeah. I would have to go away and do some looking at it.
Yeah.
I would think my colleague Alex might well
here,
have a map or something that shows which ones are connecting to which.
Yeah. Probably pre-1940s map. Have a look on one of the Ordnance Survey 1 to 10,000. This is the Ordnance Survey 1 to 25 high def.
He's been looking at some interesting Cold War maps. So he's found a website that's got some really interesting, quite detailed maps. I mean, they're all in Russian. But once he's translated them, it's giving him some really interesting, quite detailed data.
No, you don't. No.
Yeah.
The anchor's called.
But if they can show some of the bits where it's underground, the evidence.
Well, Charlotte, I found a picture of that bridge. Don't know whether I can get it up on the screen.
Yeah.
Will I have a just talk amongst yourselves while I try and work out how to get it up?
You told me that we were talking. Oh yeah.
Wow.
Can you see it?
I can, yeah.
Well, that's it. Now, if I explain to you, underneath the bridge there is the main canal the bit that was straightened out. And this was the bit, this was a footbridge, and this looped around. It came back in. Well, the first part of the loop coming from Hawkesbury was there was a thing called Wykin Double Bridges, and there's a loop called the Wykin Arm where my society has its headquarters at the end, and then just after that was where the canal. The canal followed the 300-foot contour to avoid embankments, and then it went round over South Common, round past under Deedmore Road, and then came out here. So that is the sort of, if you like, the part of the loop to going towards Rugby. But that is the bridge as it was.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, I just have very good recollection of it. I've got some better pictures, but that's one I found on Facebook.
That's a great picture. You can probably explain something to me. On the railings, there are worn grooves across it.
Yeah.
And we saw somebody had done a video of them walking the length of the river, and they happened to live on a canal boat. So as they went over the bridge, they made just a passing comment that the grooves were done with ropes or something from its time being a canal bridge.
Yes, that's right.
How is that? What was doing that?
Well, it was the old horse coming up there when they were horse pulled.
So what would they do? They'd flip. Was it rope or chain?
The rope.
Right. And what would they do? Put the rope over the top of the bridge?
Yeah, I guess so.
And
yeah.
then the horse would just carry on pulling it.
Yeah.
The horse would pull it across. Would walk across the bridge.
If you go up to Hawkesbury, you'll see on the Horsley Bridge there, you walk over that and there's some really, really deep grooves in it.
Yeah, because I thought that was really deep.
Once one starts to form, all the rest will catch in the slight groove and just exaggerate.
Yes, that's right.
A really deep one.
Yeah.
Yeah, the rope would pick up grit and it'd act like a file.
Yeah.
It's quite abrasive.
Suppose, yeah.
There's particularly a wet rope, it'd pick up a lot of grit off the towpath.
If you ever watch the jade miners on the upper channels on Freeview, that's exactly how they cut the jade. They literally use a steel rope with carbide and diamonds in it and spin it via a pulley around the rope and around the eye that they call the boulder, the lens, and it literally just using water and the friction, and that is how they saw these lenses open to check for jade inside. It's exactly the same principle.
So there you are. That
answers that. Because I was thinking, how does rope wear such a deep groove in iron?
Remember
with the grit and things, and just the length of time it was being used for.
You've got to remember this canal goes back to, well, it was first dug the Oxford Canal in 1769.
Some ways they did it differently though, didn't they, with some bridges?
These aren't the early
very well used as well, isn't it?
These aren't the early bridges, and these aren't the original Brindley bridges. They were all stone. These were put in when the canal was straightened out.
A groove, didn't they?
And so they will date back from the 18th. Whatever, I think the date on is 1820, isn't it? So yes, I mean, it would be a long time before they had engines in canal boats. So the old horse would be up and down.
Yeah.
They look after the horses better than the kids.
Yeah, it's interesting seeing the bridge in situ like that, because I was picturing the horses. I was thinking the canal towpath would be underneath the bridge, so they'd walk under the bridge and tow it. So I couldn't work out why they were putting the rope over the top, but seeing it like that in situ, the towpath is the outside on the other side of the bridge.
Yes, well, you see, this is the main track now down the Oxford Canal down to Rugby, but originally, of course, they've gone round this loop. They did keep this loop open for quite a long while, up until the 1920s, because there's lots of coal mines were around here. So that's the answer to your
Yeah, and it explains the angle and all of the things which I was just trying to work it out. I couldn't do it. And now I know. That's brilliant. Thank you. I very much appreciate that.
They have pretty thick ropes as well, because you're pulling a fair old load.
Mm.
And they weren't ponies, they were quite big horses.
Big horses, yeah.
Or mules.
Typically 4 to 6
Yes, there were
inch.
mules. Yes, there was a family, a chap called Joe Skinner. He had a mule, and he lived on his boat called, what was it called? Friendship. And he had a mule, but it fell in the canal in the 50s, I think, and drowned. But he was the last of them. But that explains that. But you go and have a look at, and that bridge would have been in operation until literally it was
probably as
at
late
least
as
100 years, I would think, because you're talking of 1769. This kind of 1770 be cut down to here. So that bridge probably 1820. You're probably talking of good 70, 80 years of horse-drawn horses going up and down that stretch of canal. And it'd be very busy as well, because you've got the coal mines that are around here, and there were also quarries down towards Rugby, as well as produce, farmland and trade coming up from London.
You probably get pottery ware coming down from Stoke and such.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I think the rope business makes a little bit more sense if you consider that some of these bridges, if you go up to Hawkesbury Junction, there are actually canals merging. There are canals going off in all directions, and I think that the horses would walk across the bridge as part of the towpath for the canal that was. The bridge was across the branch, and the canal itself was on the same side of the bridge, and so the horse would walk over the bridge.
Oh yes, they would definitely do that.
Makes more sense than seeing the horse pulling the barge under the bridge. I think the horse.
Oh no, we wouldn't have got
parallel to the bridge.
This would have been just used for taking coal out. I mean, it was kept open. But the idea was they chopped off about 12 miles of the Brindley's original canal going down to Braunston, because of course it was the onset of railways. You're talking 1820, 1830. They've got competition now of a big nature. But I can send you that article, and I've got other pictures of it as well. If you want
like
to,
that, yes, please. Thank you.
It'd be nice to have some sort of storyboard, perhaps down there to explain to people.
Yeah.
But you can see there are other Horsley bridges besides the one at Hawkesbury. There's definitely one down at Brinklow that I distinctly remember, and there are other. Oh, and there's another one where the Brinklow Marina is now. There's one there.
Are they still surviving? Are they still there, or have they?
Oh yes, they're still there. No, they've been.
So we could put on an information panel. This is what it is, and there are others that you can go and see.
Oh yes, you can.
That would be really great.
You can walk over the one at Brinklow.
Still in use.
Still in use. The ones I mentioned are all in use. Yes, they're not sitting out in a field derelict.
Not like at Spon End, displaced.
Well, no.
I can't help wondering if canals are going to come back into fashion. I mean, they're really eco-friendly if you can persuade people that they don't want something yesterday. If you've got a continuous flow of
anyway, that's how that bridge.
It doesn't matter if it starts off 3 weeks ago. You can have.
It was rather a tragic story behind this loop, up towards Deedmore Road. There's a little boy drowned in it.
Yes.
And there was.
It wasn't after that, was it?
Yeah, I can't remember. It was in either the late 60s or early 70s, because I have a friend that has lived up there since the early 70s, and he went and asked one of someone he knew that lived at the back of this loop. So that's how it came to be. That, and it's good that someone thought, mind you, the Coventry Canal Society was very proactive then. So someone would have been on the ball. I mean, our society really was formed to stop them filling in the 5.5 mile stretch down from Hawkesbury to Bishop Street. So the people that ran the society would be, you know, on the ball. Anything like that, they'd be on the ball.
Yeah.
Anyway, I will send that to you sometime next week.
Thank you.
Yes, I think I need to go. So thanks for the talk, Charlotte. That was very interesting. Sorry I arrived about 2 minutes late, but
No, you're right. You won't have missed anything in that first 2 minutes. It was just the introduction.
right.
Well, thank you all very much indeed for having me.
you.
I will say my good nights, and very nice to meet you all. And thank you all for your ideas and thoughts. I'm going to go and write them all down before I forget what you said.
Bye then.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Don't forget, this has been recorded and it will be on the